As he said, my name is Paul Heirendt. I'm going to go through this really quickly because I want us to have a discussion. So I have quite a bit here. So I came out of a Fortune 120 company, started some online services extremely early because I had been involved, as he said, hosting a bulletin board service, then involved in the well. And one of the things we found was a problem, especially, believe it or not, with our legal division. Legal online services, lawyers didn't follow the rules and used other people's identities to access the service. Go figure, you would think, but you wouldn't think. So identity has been an issue since the late 80s for me. As an entrepreneur, I've been a part of several startups, 2 of them acquired by WebMD, which is kind of circular because when I was with Times Mirror, we were one of the first investors in WebMD, so I actually got to see some of that money come back. I was involved in a startup out of the state of Washington called Patient Ed, which was acquired by Allscripts. We were the first company to do electronic prescription transmission. And the regulator in the state said, in order to do this, you have to have the physician, the patient, and the pharmacist have a 32-character password. I started laughing. He said, no, I'm serious. I said, so am I. Nobody's going to remember that. They're going to write it down, and somebody else is going to do that. Advisor to a few companies. My family has a vineyard down in Paso Robles, so if you like wine, we could talk about that. 3 companies, 1 in ad tech and 2 AI-based companies. Schedule is around AI applied to when can we meet, and then Trade Harbor is AI applied to voice biometrics. We founded that company, believe it or not, in 1998. My co-founder did one of the first presentations at ICAST on applying neural nets to speaker identity verification in 1987. So if we jumped on the AI bandwagon, it was before there was a band or a wagon. As he said, we founded Cyber Deadbolt. Trade Harbor, we've always focused on authentication of the individual and required that our requesters pass us a blinded identity claim. Unfortunately, what I found out in the last 20 years is that insurance companies, banks, large organizations have no idea who their customer is. And they say to us, well, it would be better, instead of us having to enroll our customers in your service, if you could tell us they're really our customers to begin with. So when Cyber Deadbolt was acquired by Rubiks, Rubiks does a lot of work with 3-letter agencies. So we created Cyber Deadbolt to be that opportunity for consumers to have control of their identity. And now it's being used more primarily for enterprise applications, which is why I put some of the team back together and we started Block ID around not just identity, but being able to use that identity and manage your rights as an individual. So I want to talk about a few things. Static identity factors and why they failed, centralized control of identity and why that's failed, a new definition of identity around a dynamic identity to use an individual, and then how individuals can have control of their identity.
Noah Wilson.
This is Jason Bourne.
I was wondering when you were going to make this call. How did you get this number?
You didn't actually think I was coming to Tudor City, did you?
No, I guess not. But if it's me you want to talk to, perhaps we can arrange a meet.
Where are you now?
I'm sitting in my office.
I doubt that.
And why would you doubt that?
If you were in your office right now, we'd be having this conversation face to face.
Noah Wilson. This is a code 10 abort.
We get building security up here.
He's got everything. A great line, he's got everything. So what factors were compromised?
Noah Wilson.
So he got his static voice print.
This is Jason Bourne.
How did you get this number?
His mobile number, which is supposed to be
You didn't actually think I was coming to Tudor City, did you?
And he got his fingerprint off his mouse. And the thing I missed when I watched the movie the first time, I couldn't figure out how he got in the research facility. He stole his access card.
This is a code 10 abort.
So the greatest line of the movie is when the guy goes in the room and says, he's got everything. If that's everything, we are all SOL, quite frankly. So static identity has failed. You know, we have identifiers. John was talking about state issued, federal issued. I went to a very nice dinner, some of my business partners out to a very nice dinner in San Francisco, charged it on a credit card that doesn't even have my name on it last night. I ate breakfast this morning, charged it on a credit card, doesn't have my name on it. The credit card industry is a freaking mess. Excuse my French. Social Security, as John said, it's not supposed to be an individual identifier. It was never designed for that, shouldn't be used for that. When I first moved to Missouri from Southern California in 1986, I looked at my driver's license and went, oh crap. The driver's license number was your Social Security number, and they sold those databases to marketers. Jeez. It's like, excuse me? What in the world is going on here? Passwords, we all know about that. Shared secrets, devices. Shared secrets, I called AT&T. I went through 3 layers of answering questions. The 3rd layer, the lady that supposedly could help me, asked the name of my first pet. I told her the name of my first pet. She said, that's not right. I said, what do we do? She says, I don't know. I hung up. It's like, this is dumb. I cannot assert my own identity. And smart cards. That was going to save the credit card industry. Now we're supposed to wear insulated wallets because somebody can walk by us and get all our data. Doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Just like you saw in the movie. People think the movie's exaggerated. It's actually under-exaggerated, quite frankly. But anytime you have anything that's static or static lock, that pattern is reproducible or it's gettable, right? Knowledge factors, you know, the 3 factors. What you know, what you have, and who you are. The problem with what you know and what you have is they're 100% equal error rate. If I have it, it works. If you have it, it works for you. It's 100% equal error rate. And that's because it's static. So everybody knows about the Yahoo breach. Only 1.5 billion accounts, not a big deal. Now Sony, Target, this slide actually I revised 4 times in the last 2 days. Because now, Under Armour, just the other day, Hudson Bay Company, Saks Fifth Avenue, and I don't remember all the brands, but huge, 100 million plus accounts. And then Panera Bread, St. Louis Bread Company, my own hometown, had a website open with your orders, including your phone number and your email address. Now me personally, as an identity professional, that's stupid to think those are private pieces to begin with. I can't use my email unless somebody else knows it. As soon as one person knows it, everybody can know it. Same thing with my phone number. So some of these things are exaggerated, but some of the data breaches are real. And this is the scary stuff. Don't read Kevin Mitnick's book, Invisible. Just do not read it. I had a trip to Chicago and I listened to the audiobook on the way up and the way back. And I drove back at night, so it was like 2 in the morning. And my wife said, how'd you stay awake? Kevin Mitnick scared the crap out of me for 5 hours, listening to what you have to do to keep yourself secure. And yet at the end of every chapter where he had a suggestion, he said, but that won't really work. And then he goes to the next chapter, but that won't really work. It's like, oh man. 44 records every second, 158,000 every hour, 3 million records a day. As of February, since 2013, 7 million records have been taken care of. So data breaches are there, and it doesn't work. Centralized control, Forrester, after the Equifax breach, said no single entity, including any government, can safeguard identity data, partly because of how we define identity data and have in the past. On the internet, we are everywhere, and we need strong identity in order to be safe. It's not an option anymore. So I love the fact that there are a bunch of people now proposing blockchain to solve the identity problem. There are several problems with that, but you can't start with what doesn't work and find a new solution that doesn't work. By definition, it doesn't work. And one of my heroes, Buckminster Fuller, inventor of the geodesic dome, right? He says you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes existing models obsolete. So with my voice biometric company, we do a lot of work with Enterprise Rent-A-Car. The guy who runs our innovation lab said, you got to come see my new lab. I go in his new lab, and he's got a giant 3D printer. I said, what is that for? So he says, I'll show you. He opens his cabinet, pulls out a parking lot with 3D printed cars, a 3D printed guard shack, and a 3D printed gate. And he says, we're going to solve the problem of getting people out of the parking lot. It's like, number one, you didn't need a 3D printer for that. Number two, you can't solve the problem by starting with what doesn't work by definition. It was crazy. But we need trusted digital identity. It's critical to doing anything important in the modern world. Even the things that seem to be analog these days are still backed digitally. So when your sensitive information is at risk, you are at risk. So there's three things to identity, I believe. Assertion, in other words, claim of identity. And blockchain is fine for storing an assertion. It's not good for validation, proof of that identity claim. Is it valid? As John said, you can't go back and change a record. And if you've ever looked at your credit record or a job reference record, when I was 21 and I started working for Times Mirror, they let me read when I became a manager, they let me read my investigative report. I was not even 21 when I first started working for them, but I was 21, so I had just been legal to drink. And on the report it says, he's a moderate drinker, has a cocktail every evening. Like, what? At best, at 16, I had a beer almost every evening, but that was a different story. It wasn't legal. So authentication really is the proof of you, that you are who you claim to be. It doesn't matter if your ID is valid if you can't connect it to the person. I call it the 18-inch problem. If you're using a mobile device or your laptop, there's still that gap. No matter how secure the information is, how good the identity management system is, you've got to close that gap and make sure it really is me, I'm alive, I'm the one interacting. There's three other things. Individual control. I believe unless we as individuals control identity, it's never going to work. Second, real privacy. This idea that you can have privacy and not be masked when you need to be masked, or not revoke, as John said, your privileges when you want to. That doesn't work. And we need ubiquity. If you're going to have a digital identity, you need to be able to use that no matter where you go. And so that anywhere, any device is a requirement. So we've come to a fork in the road. Wait, not that kind of fork. We've come to this kind of fork. The kind of fork where there's two choices, but you have no idea where they lead. And she's got to make that decision. So what is that fork? In my opinion, individual identity is either going to be self-sovereign or it's going to be centralized. That's the fork we're at. And a whole lot of people claiming that the blockchain is trustless and now we're going to have trustless identity, and yet they put identity providers as the validators of identity. That's centralized or federated. One of the speakers the other day said, oh, well, Dubai is going to issue part of their Smart City initiative, and I happen to do some consulting for the company that's doing that initiative. He said, Dubai is going to issue their citizens identities, so that'll be self-sovereign. It's like, at best, that's chic sovereign. That's not self-sovereign, that's government sovereign, right? It just doesn't make sense. Blockchain governance is going to either be us as individuals, or it's going to be governments or large organizations. And I think that's a dangerous future. So I just pulled this off the internet because people didn't believe me when I say people are presenting this as blockchain solutions. As if you could take something that doesn't work and you sprinkle the fairy dust of blockchain on it, and now suddenly it's going to work. That's nonsense. So they say, you know, we've had centralized identity. We now need to move the blockchain because it's trustless, so no single identity has control. And then they say, this is the future. What about that tells you it's self-sovereign? The individual has no control of their data, right? So think about it another way. What happens in the trust model in the trusted authorities? I give to the different people I deal with, and some who ask me to register a secret phrase or a shared secret, I make something up that's not real. Majority of shared secrets, I wrote an article in 2005 for the cable industry, and I said, shared secrets are an oxymoron. As soon as you share it, it's not secret, and it wasn't secret to begin with because they're checking from a database that they purchased, right? It's nonsense. But the problem is, when I go to look at what, like I told you about my bank, when I go to see what these different organizations have for me as identity, it's not all correct, right? And I don't have any influence or control. So now they propose this new model that's trustless. In other words, I still don't get to participate. That makes no sense to me. I don't want to see a future where a protocol controls whether I have rights to do something. So we're proposing a new model, and that's individual-centric identity. Self-sovereign has gotten I'm sorry for the praise, but bastardized. It's not self-sovereign. We believe self-sovereign identity is where the individual is in control, and the individual gets to decide what data they share and how much gets shared and with whom. And then they can revoke those privileges as well to those others. So self-sovereign, this is from computer world, self-sovereign identity starts with the notion that we're all makers of our own identity, online and off. Because they don't rely on a centralized authority, self-sovereign identity systems are decentralized, mirroring the way identity works in real life. It's like, okay, so that means it's time for a new definition of identity. Static factors that people have about me is not how identity works in the real world between people. In the real world, you can go to a very large event, and suddenly, you recognize somebody you know. Out of all those people, you can identify somebody. How does that work? We're humans, right? We're unique. So I come out of a medical background, and there's this myth that your cells change and you have a new body every 7 years. It's not true, right? Absolutely not true scientifically. There are trillion cells in the human body. Cells are dying or being replaced all the time. However, some never change. Alzheimer's is devastating because you don't get new brain cells. You start to get plaque on the brain, those cells die, they're not replaceable, they don't get replaced. But the interesting thing about us as humans is we can change quite a bit. I saw some friends from high school I used to play music with a couple years ago. We hadn't seen each other for 40 years, and yet we recognized each other. We're unique, yet dynamic as human beings. So we believe self-sovereign identity needs to be an individual's full ownership and control over all aspects of their identity, which enables trustless interactions, right? If you can be sure that I have control of my identity, I'm really who I claim to be, and I've been authenticated, then you can do something important with me. Absent of that, trust decays really, really quickly. As John said, good luck getting through security. So what happens in the real world, the digital world, we're spraying data all over the internet all the time. What if we could create a system where as an individual, you can start to bring that data into a controllable form, and we call that a block ID, right? So now all of a sudden your identity is not a few static features. It's multiple features changing all the time and dynamically generated. So now, if you've seen a movie where a spy goes undercover, they say, did you back channel, or did you backlog his identity? Oh yeah, we put this in there, and we got a new passport. It's all these static things. There's no way for a frauder to back identify you. But with our system, we can model individuals, and then we can pick that individual out and validate that they are who they claim to be. It's multifactorial, a lot of factors, and the individual actually controls what are those factors that are being identified. So we can identify Bob, we can validate that that's Steve and Bob, but those are static representations of what we do. This is really more like it. All these factors, some are changing at a different rate, and it's all based on which blocks the individual decides to add to their block ID. So think of block ID as a giant Rubik's Cube with 100 sides instead of 9, and the user gets to decide what those factors are. So blockchain is a very strange thing. John talked about this as well. Simultaneously the most overhyped, but least understood and most disruptive technology of our time. Like I said, people seem to think, I'm going to make a blockchain application, and that's going to sprinkle pixie dust and make the world better, right? It doesn't work that way. And part of the fundamental problem is consensus time with traditional blockchains. If you're talking about identity, I need to be able to use it immediately. I need to be able to register and use that identity. You can't do that using traditional blockchain consensus. Not nearly fast enough. So Angus Harvey, who also made the other comment, made a very interesting observation. I was trying to describe this for years, but he just nailed it. The web is a thick application layer with a very thin protocol layer. And as he said, I was a part of the well, that was an application. And the fact that we had a hypertext protocol, we could actually communicate, we could share data. As musicians, we could share our music. That's why I killed my bulletin board service, because all of a sudden, we could do it across the country and people didn't have to pay long distance charges. So that application layer is what has made the web great. Unfortunately, the blockchain is a very large protocol layer and a very thin application layer, right? Why people are saying, oh, I have a blockchain application. That's numbskull. I'm an old developer. I didn't say I have a disk drive, right? I have an internet web page, right, that is an application. No, application is a different thing than a protocol. And to think you can turn a protocol into an application platform is dangerous at best and foolishness if not. But governance is the key. Who is the one who gets to make the decision, right? That's the key to every blockchain project, right? Otherwise, there's no sense of fairness, there's no sense of timing, there's no, as John said, there's no validation of what works and what doesn't. So we believe a dynamic model of you is what's needed. So uniquely you, with you in control of it, with frictionless, zero-knowledge, multi-factor authentication. We have several patents at Trade Harbor, a few patents at Cyber Deadbolt, and then a new breed of patents that takes, Cyber Deadbolt gave individuals the ability to lock accounts, and so they could lock access. It still didn't get to the root of what is my identity claim and how do you validate that. Our new patents are around that process of assertion, validation, and then accountability. And authentication is a key part of that. So the areas we're working in, we have a music and entertainment offering where individuals who create a piece of media, whether that's music or video, can secure that media file with their rights. So a born on date embedded in the audio and the date and time stamp. So now you can prove you created that piece at that point in time. And then when somebody goes to download it and buy rights from you, now that piece of music can be embedded with the rights that you purchased. So for instance, I go online, I buy a track for $1 for personal use, but I use it on a YouTube video. That creator doesn't have to track me down. The bot finds it, and I get a bill for $99. I bought it for $1, but the mechanical rights were $100. I get a bill for $99. There's no, the musician doesn't have to be involved, but yet they have their rights protected, and they get what's meaningfully theirs. We also have a platform that we work with that does, they've been doing forensic evidence collection. They had a mobile app that they launched about 4 years ago. They serve from one of the branches of the military uses it for their crime investigation and evidence tracking, and now a lot of municipalities and state agencies use their platform. Their version 2 is coming out, and we're adding blockchain to that. So when there's a piece of evidence collected, it gets a unique ID. When there's a witness video, it can be encoded so that it can be proved that it was done at that date and time, at that place, and not changed, right? And all of that gets block IDs stored in the blockchain, but after the application does what it needs to do to secure that data and make it available based on rights.
You're not storing videos on the blockchain.
No, the individual keeps the video, but the video is encrypted. So the agency, actually within the app, it encrypts that. Supply chain management. One of my co-founders was PwC and KPMG, helped form a consortium for supply chain for the automotive industry. The fellow who now operates that, those consulting firms backed out, is very interested in adding blockchain ledger technology to that process. Very complicated, multi-layer. The auto industry is one of the more complicated. He also has a business doing this for DoD, for aircraft and military vehicles and weaponry. And then healthcare. A company that we're working with does lifecycle management of medical devices and also does then FDA reporting. So if there's a recall or a software update or whatever, it's accountability around did that institution actually implement that. So let's have a conversation. I wanted to get done so we'd have some time to talk.
Amazing presentation. The topic you discussed is so important, young Billy. Before you start the question, I want you to show your the speaker. And I was like, blown up. The volume that came, it sounded like, came from a big speaker, just handheld, $99. So if you want all this, gadget thing, talk to him on music is the one. Please go ahead.
So,
No, go ahead. In the back. We'll get to all of them.
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, good day. My name is Jamari Peterson.
Nice to meet you, Jamari. I'm Paul.
Pleasure, pleasure. I really had a question around your methodology when it comes to areas that are still developing it and have less factors to actually leverage for identifying. So like if we're talking about developing regions in Asia, South America, Africa, where their main thing is really the airtime on their cell phone.
Right.
That's only one point. How did that fit into your methodology for this
Excellent question. I was at an entrepreneur retreat a couple weeks ago in Scotts Valley in the Redwoods, and a gentleman, there was 150 CEOs from 48 countries. One of the gentlemen is from Nigeria, and he's working with the African government to provide Pan-African identity. And so he loves the idea of dynamic identity. There are no static identifiers that are accepted. Most people in the more rural parts of Africa have no identifiers. Right? None. Absolutely none. They're unbanked. They don't have driver's license. They're known because people in the village know them, right? And maybe people in the next village know them. So we're looking at a structure where that becomes the dynamic. Part of our patent pending technology is really around the fact that I am known and trusted in my community because other people in my community have known and trusted me, and I have a record of trust, right? We were going to call it proof of reputation, but somebody else uses that already. Medium uses it for articles. So the more I thought about it and we discussed it, we came down to it's proof of ID. I am who I claim to be. That's the proof, right? And that proof is by who I know and who knows me and who has interacted with me. So yeah, in the digital world that works, but in the physical world there's also application. You had a question?
So, maybe I misunderstood your point. It was, first of all, a very interesting conversation. My name is Amar, and I'm
Nice to meet you.
Product manager from Financial Services.
Okay.
So you said that it is all individual-centric identity, self-sovereign,
Right.
Sort of identity management. But then, if a criminal wants to, hide his identity, and or he wants to take somebody else's identity, I mean, he will obviously not show his true self.
No. So our three core values. First one is integrity. The second one is transparency, and the third one is accountability. With the voice biometric service, we started out in the credit card industry, and quite frankly, we've learned over the years the credit card industry makes too much money on fraud to solve the problem. Sounds cynical, but I can tell you chapter and verse. I can show you a large market study we did with MasterCard. Everybody loved it except the banks and MasterCard because they have fraud products that don't work, but they make a lot of money on them. Go figure. So to get back to your point though, the real issue is if you have true accountability, and I'm glad he brought up that I was a member of the well. On the well, you couldn't pose to somebody else. Somebody had to validate you into the well. Somebody who already knew. And I grew up in Southern California, and a lot of my friends moved up here and started tech companies. So I had people in San Francisco involved in the whole Earth linked library, right, which is the well, and they knew me. So they let me come on, and they knew I was a musician, and I supported musicians, so they let me create a musicians group on the well. But only people who were validated by other people as musicians and as real people posing as themselves got admission into that group. And then, for some reason on the internet, we decided that being anonymous is a valuable thing. In my opinion, that's the biggest problem with the internet, is anonymity, right? You can be anything you want. I used to show when we first started, back in '98, there was a cartoon, it was a dog at a keyboard. It says on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And it was a joke. Well, it's not funny. We've seen the consequences of that, right?
Hey Paul, my name is Sam. I'm curious, are you thinking to also, when you say dynamic ID, are you thinking to implement the protocol in on request basis, just in time? So essentially for a consensus within the consensus to happen.
Yeah, that's why we call it.
To confirm.
We call it proof of ID. We can't wait for confirmation in traditional blockchain sense. We're looking at some of the newer platforms. Hyperledger isn't even performant enough, right? Like with the voice signature service, all of our requesters require, and in our SLA, they require 500 millisecond. We put in our SLA 300 millisecond response time. To put it in perspective, I'm a fast talker, so space in my talk is about 100 milliseconds. My wife, it's more like 300 milliseconds. So 300 milliseconds, quite literally, if you're interacting with the voice signature service, you stop speaking, you haven't even heard the thank you, and we've already given a score back to the requester. That's the kind of response time you need for identity. Otherwise, it doesn't work. There's a teeter-totter. It's security and convenience. Everybody wants to break that, make it highly secure and highly convenient. I was telling you about for prescription transmission, right? State of New Jersey, 32-character password. I said, you know what? I've been working with doctors for 20 years. There's not a doctor on the face of the earth that's going to memorize that. He said, well, then what's going to happen? I said, at best, it's going to be his nurse renewing those prescriptions. More likely, it's going to be the office manager. But even more likely than that, the high school girl that comes in on Wednesdays to do clerical work, she's going to renew those from the password on a post-it note sitting on the monitor, right? And that's what happened. So this problem of identity isn't new, but people have been doing important things without accountability, true accountability, just because they're trying to make it convenient. But you have to balance security and convenience. If you make it too secure, people go around it. They'll do something else. And we had a financial institution who started testing our service. We return a 50 score at the equal error rate for voice biometrics. So that's less than 2% equal error rate. If you want less false accepts, you go higher. If you want less false rejects, then you go lower. So they set it at 70, and they tested it with their own internal customers who also manage their money with them. And they found that their response was, if I fail twice, I just move my money somewhere else. And they're people that work for the company. So they thought, oh crap, we can't put a 90 score for login, right? So now what they do, I'm not supposed to say the number, is well below 50 for login. When anybody goes to do something important, this is a normal fraud point. Moving money within accounts, it's a little higher. Moving money outside to another account, it's even higher. They do a funds transfer of a certain amount, it could be a 90 score. Because if it doesn't go through, pass them to a person and manage by exception to make sure that person really is that person and really wants that being done. Question?
Can I ask a question? Is it okay?
Sure.
Diamond.
You have the microphone.
Diamond.
Oh yeah.
That industry is so important that it has signature and variety of things, in addition to the number of carats and
sure.
The optical properties and so on. Anything that's valuable if you're thinking of identity, that's
sure.
economics.
Right.
Please comment on that.
Yeah, so diamonds the industry already has a birthmark, if you will, in diamonds, right? It's microscopic and it's embedded. So they tried to solve the source problem. Is it a blood diamond or is it a legitimate diamond? And is it a diamond that has been stolen, right? That gets registered. So they already have a semblance of what we're talking about. We're now adding that to anything else. Documents, records, media items, whatever you have and have rights to or want to have rights to, right, can be secured and be given a unique ID. So every interaction with the voice signature service has a unique ID. Not just, and every phrase they're asked to say gets a unique ID. All of that gets stored and encrypted. So it's not publicly available. Only our requesters can pull one of those voice signatures, but they all get a block ID. With Schedule, you pick the people, and Schedule uses deep learning, artificial intelligence to find the best date time on behalf of everybody. So if 3 of us who don't know each other want to schedule a meeting, the person on Schedule says, these are the people, and Schedule comes back with an answer, the best date, time, and place. Well, that's a lot of sensitive information, right? And the learning is sensitive. So we apply block IDs, and that blinds all the data. So the learning engine and other people who have access to that data have no idea that that's my meeting at 9 o'clock in Sunnyvale. Right?
And another area is human beings have chemical signature, which is so many chemicals of whatever details, etc. I don't want to belabor on the topic. And similar to dogs recognizing other dogs,
sure.
only by smell or something else, even being able to do electronic nose, if you want to look at it.
Sure.
What kind of work are you doing on the physical side than digital side of things?
Sure. So St. Louis is has one of the genome centers from the beginning, and a lot of the computational platform was developed in St. Louis. They've been doing a series, we have a thing every Thursday night in St. Louis called Venture Cafe. About 400 people, innovators and people interested in innovation, come together. It's an awesome program. But we had a series by the Genome Center talking about genomics, where we are, where it's headed, and where the different applications are. For instance, CRISPR to edit genes to actually cure diseases or reverse disease process where it's possible. So I asked the question at the end of the one, because I happen to know because a friend of ours ran the development group, and I said, so there's this story that we've mapped the genome. And he goes, no, that's popular press. We've mapped maybe 20%. Says, we still don't know what the rest of it. And he says, you didn't even ask the right question. He says, the reality is, even the part we've mapped, we don't understand why certain things cause either good or bad. He says, that's the more important thing that we haven't discovered yet. So it's kind of like blockchain. People are saying, oh, well, I have my DNA, and you can, and so it's this magic dust, and now everybody's going to be healthy. That's complete, as my pastor would say, baloney sugar, right? It's not true. So I come from a science background, right? Test, if it works, you repeat the test. If it works again, you repeat the test again, right? It's test-driven development, or as John said, I'm from Missouri, I'll believe it when I see it, right? So I was born in Missouri, moved to California, came back to Missouri, and everybody says, well, you're not a Missourian. It's like, yeah, I was actually born here. I was 2 when we left, but I always grew up in a house with that mentality. My mom was born in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. So I grew up with that. Farmers are very realistic, right? So they don't believe something unless they see it happen, and they see it happen repeatedly. They don't take these new practices for farming and implement them until they've tested it. Any other questions? We're almost out.
Okay, please go ahead.
So what's like the business model for Block ID? You know, do individuals sort of create their identity on your platform, and then you know, which sort of
it's different depending on the application.
For authentication.
It's application driven. Ultimately, we want to be a platform company that enables applications. But what I learned in 20 years trying to convince people that voice biometrics needs to be dynamic, not at Schwab, my voice is my password, right? So I learned the only way we ever got traction was when we built applications. That's my alarm.
Yeah, it's almost time, and then I want to ask the last question, which
Did
is...
that answer your question?
Maybe.
So,
I want to talk to you later.
So the music industry example is the easiest one, right? And if you want, go on Facebook and look at Fresh Produce STL. It's a live stream of guys who produce beats. One of the hosts was a Grammy Award winner before he was 25. A couple of the guys who compete are diamond record holders. Not gold, not platinum, diamond. And they have no way of monetizing their tracks. And in a lot of cases, hip-hop artists use their tracks and they don't get any credit. So we're creating this platform. So the artist doesn't pay anything to secure that with a block ID, but at the transaction, we take a small piece of that transaction when somebody downloads it to enforce those rights.
But block IDs are specific to applications. Is what you're saying, that you basically create application-specific block ID-based authentication mechanism?
So say it a different way, you can have an application that calls our platform that uses the block ID protocols. With part of that is blockchain. There are a whole lot of other protocols we use.
I'm just thinking of the giant Rubik's Cube that's
Sure.
supposed to be me, right?
Yep.
You know? So did I create that Rubik's Cube, or is that Rubik's Cube just
No,
specific to the
you
application?
create and you control it, and then you decide who gets to use it, and they have to actually pay, right?
So I can sign up for block ID,
Right.
and then any vendors that happen to have their
Sure.
stack, including block ID,
Right.
in terms of the authentication.
It's the opposite of, if I drive my rental car to my friend's house in Tiburon, I pay a fee. The Golden Gate Bridge when I come back, right? And with the rental car company, that's a whole lot of money plus the toll. What if the merchant...
Oh, they'll give you a fast track. They'll ask you to pay for
Yeah, that's even more. So what if the restaurant in Tiburon that we go to, right? What if that restaurant had to pay for me to cross the bridge? That's the model we're trying to create. Make sense?
Yeah.
And then in the combination, time is over, but I want to make sure, because
Sure.
you're unique in a way. You're a musician, you're all a scientist, etc., inventor, pioneer.
My wife says I'm weird.
Good news. That's good news.
Yeah.
And
Listen to your wife.
Yeah.
I don't listen to her, obviously.
Congratulations on good job. Yeah.
When it comes to the grandkids, she rules.
You have 20 minutes break and talk.
Thank you.
Continue your discussion. Don't stop.
So I'm Paul at blockid.cloud, and if you want a card, I can give you